So basically what we have to do is we have to talk about how oxygen and how CO2 is carried in the blood, right? Red blood cells carry the oxygen, hemoglobin, right? When the hemoglobin has oxygen, we call it oxyhemoglobin. When it doesn't, we call it deoxyhemoglobin, okay? Now, this part right here represents the blood vessel, the capillary, okay? The capillary. The top represents in the tissues. This is my big toe right here, okay? And here represents the lungs, okay? The lungs, right? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put my book back over here just in case I made a mistake, right? Here we go. Now, again, this is the tissue. So we have our cells. This right in here is the interstitial fluid, right? Interstitial fluid, right? The fluid that cells are bathed in. And this is the endothelium. This represents the endothelium, the one cell lining of the capillary, right? Okay? So, in the tissue, in my big toe, right? If I've been running, jogging, walking, or whatever, I'm going to have a lot of CO2 built up because it's a waste product of metabolism, right? We've talked a lot about that in chapter 23, but anyway, okay? But in the tissue, the CO2 needs to move into the bloodstream. This over here represents the capillary, the bloodstream, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay? So what happens is this. CO2 is carried in different forms, and let's talk about that. Number one, right? Number one, 7% of the CO2 comes out of the tissues. Remember, it's going to go from high pressure to low pressure, right? So 7% of that CO2 is going to just dissolve in the blood and be carried in the blood by itself. Just CO2. Not very much. 7%. Okay? Now, there's more CO2 in the tissues. It needs to get in the bloodstream, come back to the lungs, and so we can breathe it out, right? So 3% of that CO2 plus H2O, right, water, forms H2CO3. H2CO3 is carbonic acid, and carbonic acid is a very weak acid, and it has a tendency to kick one of the hydrogens off and become HCO3 minus, because it kicked off a hydrogen, a positive, right? HCO3 minus plus hydrogen, okay? And that HCO3 minus, that is very, 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 very important blood buffer. There are, I forget, 5 or 6 blood buffers, but the main one is this bicarb. Because bicarb is very unique, right? Because bicarb, HCO3 minus plus H, right? It comes from H2CO3, okay? And what happens is this reaction can go this way and we liberate hydrogen. And hydrogen in the blood, remember the pH scale is a measure of hydrogen, right? But oh, by the way, when the blood's too acidic, too much hydrogen, it'll go this way. So it's a buffer, right? Right? I make a crude statement. You know, some guys, they like boys and girls, right? They go either way. But anyway, this can go, sorry it was a bad joke. But anyway, okay? Here to here, either way, right? So what happens is this. A little bit of the CO2 joins with the water. It is a very slow reaction. It doesn't happen very much. And we get carbonic acid, the weak acid, and the carbonic acid disassociates, okay? It kicks the hydrogen off, it becomes bicarb, and the hydrogen, and they float around in the blood. Okay? Bicarbon hydrogen. Okay? So that is 7% and 3%. That's only 10% of the CO2, right? 70% of the CO2 comes out of the tissues, it diffuses into the bloodstream, it gets hooked up inside the red blood cell. CO2 plus water, and inside the RBC, there's an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase, okay? And carbonic anhydrase makes this reaction go very fast. It's a catalyst, okay? And so carbonic anhydrase makes us form carbonic acid, H2CO3. The carbonic acid disassociates and kicks off a hydrogen, right? And we get bicarb and a hydrogen. And the bicarb, I have an arrow here, exits the red blood cell and floats around in the blood, the bicarb. Okay? Now, the bicarb is negatively charged. Okay? Because it kicked off a hydrogen. It was balanced, and then it kicked off a hydrogen, a plus, so it's negatively charged. So, when that happens and the bicarb exits, guess what? Chlorine in the blood, right? It's an electrolyte, right? Sodium Na plus, chlorine Cl minus. It's a negatively charged electrolyte, okay? And through active transport, then what happens is, when the bicarb comes out, our charges are no longer balanced. So the chlorine, this is a visual joke, comes into the red blood cell, and that's called the chloride shift, okay? The chloride shift. And those of you that are smart know on the other end it's going to come back out. But anyway, right? And the reason the chlorine goes in is to balance the charges. We had a negative charge, HCO3 minus, come out. Right? It's called the chloride shift. Okay? Now, that is 70%. The bulk of the CO2 is carried in the form of bicarb. Okay? Now, 20% CO2 plus hemoglobin yields HbCO2, right? So the amazing thing about hemoglobin is, we all know hemoglobin, it carries oxygen, right? Guess what? It can carry CO2 also. So about 20% of the CO2 is carried by the hemoglobin, right? HbCO2. Now, we're in the tissue, and there was high concentration of CO2, and because it's going to move from the high concentration into the bloodstream, it's going to diffuse into the bloodstream, right? So the CO2 is coming in, but oh, by the way, this blood came from the heart. It's got a lot of oxygen. So hemoglobin carrying the oxygen, 98.5% of the oxygen is going to be carried by the hemoglobin, and it's going to go from high pressure to low pressure. So the oxygen goes this direction, the CO2 goes into the bloodstream, the oxygen comes out. And oh, by the way, 1.5% of the oxygen is just floating around in the blood, not hooked to anything. Okay? But 98.5% of the oxygen is carried by the hemoglobin. Okay? Oxyhemoglobin. And when the hemoglobin dumps off the oxygen, guess what? It can carry the CO2 back. Right? About 20% of it is carried by that. Okay? Now, again, this is in the tissues where we produce the CO2 in the cell. The oxygen-rich red blood cell gives off the oxygen that goes into here from its higher concentration to its lower. Okay? Now, let's switch that around. Let's talk about in the lungs, in the alveoli. Okay? In the alveoli, we're going to have a totally opposite situation. Okay? We'll start with this. 7% of the CO2 is just dissolved, right? 7% came out, it's just dissolved in the bloodstream. So it can come out here from a high concentration gradient to a low concentration gradient. We said 3% is CO2 plus water yields carbonic acid, bicarb plus hydrogen. Well, the reaction goes this way. Yes, so the hydrogen hooks up with the bicarb, becomes carbonic acid, splits into CO2 and water, and about 3% of it goes back that way. Alright? Is carried that way. Yes? Now, here we go. We said the bicarb went outside. The bicarb comes back inside the red blood cell. It gets hooked up with a hydrogen to form carbonic acid. Remember, carbonic anhydrase inside the red blood cell. The carbonic anhydrase helps us to split into water and CO2, and that's how 70% of the CO2 goes into the alveolus. We also said hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is carrying about 20% of the CO2. It disassociates, and the hemoglobin, the CO2 will go that way from the bloodstream into the alveolus so we can breathe it out. Okay? Now, in the alveolus, I got a fresh breath, I got a full chest full of oxygen, right? And the concentration in here is high. And that's going to drive it into the bloodstream where the oxygen concentration is much lower. Because the gas is going to go from high concentration to low concentration. Okay? Down its concentration gradient. So, 98.5% of the oxygen plus hemoglobin, HbO2, oxyhemoglobin. Okay? Now, about 98.5%. Now, about 1.5%, a tiny amount, oxygen is just going to go floating around in the blood. Okay? So all you have to really remember is, right, CO2 plus H2O. Right? And when you do the double arrows, that means it'll go both ways. Okay? I forgot to mention, when the bicarb comes back into the red blood cell, right, a negative charge, HCO3 minus, comes into the red blood cell, and guess what it does? It kicks the chlorine out. It's a chlorine shift. At one point, the chlorine goes in because the bicarb came out. But when the bicarb comes out, boom, the chlorine goes back out. Okay? When the bicarb comes back in, the chlorine goes out. Okay? And the chlorine is just to balance the charges, to keep everything kosher. Okay? The whole basis of all of this is this chemical reaction. It's the whole basis. Right? Bicarb is mega, mega, mega. Okay? It's the main buffer in the blood. And what happens is this. 2. What happens is this. If you're having a heart attack, CO2 will build up. It'll drive the reaction this way. You'll get a buildup of hydrogen. Right? Your heart stops pumping. You get a buildup of hydrogen. Your blood will get more and more and more acidic. So in the olden days, they took a big old needle about that big around, about that long, and they shoved it up under your chest, into your heart, and give them 2 amps of sodium bicarb, right, to get rid of that acid. Okay? Nowadays, the paramedics tell me they run it in the IV, but anyway, right? to get rid of that acid. The acid built up because your heart's not pumping, and the cells are still alive, and the cells are still producing CO2. The CO2 is resulting in the blood becoming more and more acid, and the blood's not getting back to the heart and being pumped around. So therefore, it builds up. Okay? Okay. A lot of chemistry there. And you just have to think about, again, this is in the tissues. In the tissues, we produce the CO2, and it goes into the bloodstream. We have concentration of oxygen is high in the red blood cells. It goes into the tissues. They play Red Rover, right? You ever play Red Rover? Right? Yes? Same thing. Okay? Now, when you get back to the lungs, guess what? You got a lot of CO2 and not a lot of oxygen. So the oxygen in the lungs is high, and it goes into the red blood cell for the most part, right? 70 plus 20, 90%, right? And oh, by the way, we got a lot of CO2. Because we have a lot of CO2 in the bloodstream, boom, it goes into the alveolus and we get rid of it, okay? But it's all based on this chemical reaction right here, right? Yes? And again, this is a buffer. A buffer meaning it'll join back up with the hydrogen to get rid of the acidity, or it will kick the hydrogen off to make the blood more acidic. Remember? 7.35 to 7.45. Very close range. Okay? Oh, by the way, on the test it's 7.4. But I didn't say that. But anyway, that's the number, right? 735 to 745. Okay? Average 7.4. Okay? And so, depending on, guess what? If it gets down here, remember on the pH scale, if the number's lower, it's more acidic, right? Then it'll go this way. The hydrogen will join this, and the blood will be less acidic. Oh, by the way, if it goes this way and the blood becomes too basic, it'll go this way and kick that hydrogen off. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's complex chemistry. Well, it's really simple, but anyway, it's amazing that our body knows to do that. It's so fine, because if it keeps it between those two lines, then guess what, right? Then we stay alive, we get to go to birthday parties and climb mountains. When you get out of either way, very far, right? Then you got to pay the undertaker. It's very simple, okay? So, but anyway, what we needed to get, what I didn't go over yesterday, is this. Which way it's going to go. And again, it's in your book. You need to look at it. You need to read that. You need to study it a little bit so you understand it better. Okay? Okay? But it's just which way is it going to go, right? It's going to go from high to low concentration. It's going to diffuse. Okay? So that's what we needed to talk about. How oxygen and CO2 are carried in the blood as a result of in order to keep us alive. Right? Right? So, okay. Let's talk just a little bit about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. CHRONIC, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. COPD, right? Okay? COPD. Yes? It's kind of a very broad term. Most people with COPD, guess what? They either have emphysema, EMPHYSEMA, or they have chronic bronchitis. And let's talk about the difference and what that means, right? Well, first off, about 80% of the people with COPD, 80%, guess what? Smokers, right? But now if we say 80% are smokers, guess what? 20% are not smokers, didn't smoke, okay? 80% of them are smokers, but about 20% didn't, okay? Now, okay, here's a word you need to know. D-Y-S-P-N-E-A, dyspnea, right? Dyspnea. What does D-Y-S mean? Right? Difficult or painful, right? Dysphagia means, ooh, it hurts when I swallow every time. Dysphagia, right? But dyspnea means difficult or painful breathing, right? Pnea, right? Yes. Oh, by the way, pneumonia, P-N-E-U. You see P-N-E-U, you know that's lungs. It's always lungs, right? So dyspnea means difficult or painful breathing, right? Okay. Difficult, painful, and there's another term that sometimes we say, air hunger, right? Can't get enough air in. Can't get enough air in. Okay? Yes? My father, at the end of his life, right? You could hear him breathe. Right? Is that normal to hear people breathe? Like, I'm standing here. Am I going to hear Joseph breathe? No. Am I going to hear Madison breathe? No. That's not normal. Right? For an older person, maybe. Or yeah, if I'm running a race, absolutely. But just sitting here and relaxed, should I hear Christian breathe? No. Right? Older people, you start hearing them breathe, you know that's not good. But anyway, okay? So, okay? Dyspnea. Okay. Let's talk about emphysema, right? Emphysema. Okay? Permanent enlargement of the alveoli, right? Okay, let me explain. We talked about how when we exhale, does not take any. That's a passive process. That's the word I was looking for. That's a passive process, right? If you blow up a balloon, the second you take your mouth away from the balloon, what does it do? Goes back down, right? That's the way our lungs are. They are elastic, okay? But in emphysema, the lungs lose their elasticity. And what happens is, remember we drew the alveoli like this, right? Yes. Okay, they have their little pores in between them, yes. But what happens is this, okay? In a person, and again, usually they're smokers, not always, but guess what? You get consolidation, is the word we use, consolidation, right? So if you look at that compared to, what does that tell you? We have a lot less surface area here, don't you? Right? You need surface area to exchange gases. And if the surface area isn't there, then guess what? These became consolidated. Okay? A person with emphysema, what will happen is that when we breathe, we normally use certain muscles. But a person with emphysema, they have trouble getting the air out. And they have to raise their chest even higher. So they use muscles that they normally don't use, right? So when they breathe, now, that may be normal if I'm running a 5K and I run across the finish line and I'm going, but it's not normal, right? If nothing's going on. So these people have to use accessory muscles, extra muscles, or muscles that can be used for breathing but usually aren't unless you're running at a high capacity or something like that, right? To raise that chest up and down. Okay? They use their accessory muscles. Okay? Now, the bronchioles. What happens to the bronchioles is this. Okay? They inhale. I-N-H-A-L-E. Right? But when they exhale, guess what? The tubes collapse. So when they try to exhale, and the tube is collapsed, guess what happens? You get trapped air in here, right? The air is stale. The oxygen's been taken out of it, so you don't have a nice fresh oxygen tube. Remember the blood vessel running along right beside? Yes? Okay. So if you breathe in, but you can't breathe that air out, that same stale air is in your chest, and the oxygen level goes down, down, down. And again, the tube collapses, right? Yes? Remember in the asthma patient, when they get real small, they start wheezing, right? But anyway, so this breathing tube that's normally open, they get barrel-chested. They get barrel-chested after years of breathing that way. Their chest is big and round because of this. Okay? It traps huge volumes of air in the alveoli, and the lungs hyperinflate. The lungs get bigger, 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 and they get barrel-chested, right? Pectus carnatum, I believe, right? The other one is Pectus excavatum, but anyway, right? So you get consolidation, you get air stuck in here. Okay? You've lost your elasticity, and it closes down and the air is trapped. Okay? Now, the pulmonary capillaries running around, yes, they get damaged. They get damaged. You're struggling trying to breathe, and they get damaged, and the resistance goes up. And what happens is that the high pressure, right, the resistance, it squeezes down and the pressure goes up, trying to send that blood back to the heart, and what happens is the right side of the heart starts to fail, okay? And when the right side fails, good things don't happen, right? Okay. Again, smoking, but also there are genetic factors. Remember we said 20% are not smokers, okay? But smoking and genetic factors have to do with this. Now the real kicker is, have you ever known someone that was like 40 years old walking around carrying an oxygen tank? Yes. Or they're a smoker and they have the genetic predisposition, so they got the double whammy, right? Yes. Have you ever known people that you loved and they had self-destructive behavior? Right? Right? Yes. Okay, whether it's drugs or smoking or whatever, you know. But anyway, I don't mean to be unkind, but I mean, we all know people like that, right? And such. Oh, they got bad lungs. One person, oh, well, they got bad lungs. It runs in their family. What in the heck are they doing with their, right? I mean, my dad smoked Winston's, but when my dad started smoking, it was 1939, right? Before they knew it was bad for you. But anyway, okay? So, smoking and genetic factors, right? Now let's talk a little bit about chronic bronchitis, okay? Chronic bronchitis. Many times that is caused by inhaled irritants, right? Inhaled irritants. Yes? Right? Okay. We get chronic production of mucus, right? Chronic production of mucus, right? We get inflammatory fibrosis. And what happens is this. If this tube gets clogged with mucus, guess what doesn't go in or out? Air, right? And oh, by the way, it's dark, it's warm, it's moist. What do you think's going to happen?
Bacteria grows.
Germs are going to grow, yes? Bacteria is going to grow, exactly, yes. Anytime it's dark, warm, moist, right? You got a bread box at home? You ever put the bread in there for a week with the lid shut and it's real hot during the summertime, right? And you pull it out, you got moldy bread, yum yum, right? Yes. It's dark, it's warm, it's moist. Go figure, right? But anyway, okay? And many times the irritants are from the smoking, the tar, the nicotine, all that stuff, right? But sometimes they aren't, yes? Years ago, I was blessed. I got on an airplane and 20 hours later, I landed in Beijing. And I thought it was raining. And it was gray and cloudy. I could have swore it's damp. And as we came through and we finally landed, guess what? No, it wasn't. It was pollution. It was air pollution, right? That's the first time in my life. It was, I think, 2013 or 14. First time in my life, I saw people walk around with masks on in China, right? Because environmental pollution, okay? From the cars and from the industry. Yes? Oh, by the way, it's the same in Los Angeles, I guess.
I was going to say that.
Yes? Right?
I've been there. It was awful.
Yes? Now, after about 3 days there, and I thought to myself when I landed that, I said, do you think I would ever go jogging in Beijing? No way am I going to jog and breathe that garbage in, right? Oh, by the way, people that live in Los Angeles and breathe that smog all the time, right, have more heart attacks, by the way. Yeah, it's one of the reasons. More heart disease, I should say, right? But anyway, so sometimes it's not you're a smoker, sometimes it's you live in a place, right? Had another friend, his wife was a hairdresser, and he believed that, 35 years of hairspray, breathing the hairspray, fixing ladies. He believed that's what did it to her. She got that, okay? Yes? Or, let me see what else I wrote. Smog, hairspray. What about paint? What about painters? Especially when you're painting on the inside of a building. Maybe not outside when you're spraying, but on the inside, okay? So, yeah. In China, we stayed on the 84th floor, if you can believe that. 84 floors up. It was scary, but amazing. You could see all of the city. It was amazing. Yeah. Okay. So, pardon me, that was Shanghai. We went to Shanghai a couple of days later, and that's where it was. But in Beijing, after about 3 days in the night, it rained, and I got up. Oh, wow, I can't believe it. Right? The rain coming down, it washed all that crap out of the air. And it was, you know how it smells after it rains and it smells real good? That's what it smelled like from the ozone. But anyway, yeah, okay? So, I might go jogging that day, but other than that, no way. Yes? So, I also had a patient with a COPD, and he had never smoked, and he was a short, squatty guy with a thick chest, which some of them are, and he got terrible pneumonia when he was 3 or 4 years old, and this was before antibiotics, and he lived through it, but it damaged his lungs, and he had the COPD, when he got older and such. Not from anything he did, but from having a bad infection when he was very young, okay? Now, the treatment, bronchodilators and corticosteroids, okay? Now, there was also a treatment years ago where the lungs really increase in size, and there was a treatment years ago. There was a doctor, I think it was Brazil. Anyway, what he would do to his COPD patients was this. Their lungs were huge. He would make a slit like this and cut this part of the lung out and make the lungs smaller. His thing was like the seams on a football. He would make the lungs smaller, and he thought that way their lungs would be basically like that, much more normal in size, and he thought that that would help them and do better. That's not a standard treatment now, so they did some research. I don't think that actually helped people that much. But anyway, that was his idea, that if I can decrease the size of the lungs, they'll have more surface area, and it'll be easier for air to get in and out. But anyway, yeah, he had a whole ward, and he did surgery on people. Anyway, okay, the treatment, bronchodilators and corticosteroids, and of course, anytime they start getting a lung infection, you gotta be giving them antibiotics, right? Had another patient, he was a truck driver, and his wife told me, he had weak lungs, and anytime he started getting sick, she had to go straight to the medical doctor because she said if we let it get bad, then he's going to be in the hospital, right? And such. So, anyway, interesting. But I just remember that my father, you could hear him breathe at the end of his life, and yeah, not a good thing. Okay. We already talked about asthma real quickly. Yes, right. Many people with asthma, they'll start coughing. Oh, by the way, you can develop asthma at any age. We think children, but older people develop asthma too. They'll cough a lot and then kind of can't get their breath, difficulty breathing, wheezing, and chest tightness. Yes. Now here's another thing about asthma too, and that is this. People with asthma, you have an asthma attack, it's scary. They can't breathe. And so they're having an asthma attack, but guess what? It's scary when you can't breathe, right? Yes? What do we do when we get scared? Right? Yes? And so maybe we makes asthma attack worse, or maybe we have a panic attack, right? Yes? Yes? So there is a mental, don't get me wrong, I am not saying it's in their head. It's not in their head, it's in their lungs. But I'm just saying there's a mental component. See, I was taught that, yes, we're physical, but mental has a lot to do with, right? I've seen that so much. I've seen guys with rheumatoid arthritis with huge knuckles, massive, right? Come in the office, I give them a treatment. Oh, what'd you do today? Oh, I was up on the roof hammering shingles. When most people would be, at home, I can't do anything. Amazing, right? So, but anyway, okay. The most common type, of course, is allergic, right? The airways get inflamed, and that can be they breathe a chemical or pollen or whatever, right? We talked about how the IgE goes up and the eosinophils go up, right? And once you have this inflammation, it carries on, and your airways are hypersensitive. Okay, so It's like this. When I was a little kid growing up outside Houston, right? We would go camping with the boys group from the church. Guess what? I got the poison ivy, right? Yes. Now guess what? The next time I went camping, I didn't touch none of that stuff. Guess what I got? Poison ivy. Every time I went camping in the piney east woods of Texas, guess what I got? Poison ivy. Because I was sensitive to it, right? I haven't had it in 30 years, you know. But I was sensitized to it, right? About 1 in 10 Americans suffer from asthma, and the cases we talked about has gone way up, okay? And the treatment, right? The new treatment is they're giving them corticosteroids. That's the word I couldn't think of yesterday. Corticosteroids, right? And that way, it decreases the inflammation in the lungs every day, and they don't have to usually use their emergency inhaler very often. It's not good to be doing that a whole bunch, right? You only use the emergency inhaler when it's an emergency, right? Okay. TB. We already talked about this too. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, right? You spread by coughing. Yes. You inhale the air. This is astounding when I read this. 1/3 of the world's population is infected, but most people never develop TB. So 1/3 of the people, right? Now, I don't think that's probably true in America, but if you've ever been to third world countries, right? Yes. It's probably where that comes from, okay? Causes a massive inflammation and immune response, right? And remember we talked about in the lungs we get the granulomas, yes? Right? And that's what they're looking for. If they're looking for TB, they're looking for granulomas. Chest x-ray, you stand up in front of the bucky, right? The big metal thing that's cold, and you, right? Named after Dr. Bucky, by the way, right? You stand in front of the bucky and you get your chest x-ray, okay? Or if you can't get out of bed, they shove the plate underneath you, and anyway. Okay. Now, there are some very deadly forms of drug-resistant TB now. And again, that is from people that don't take care of it, because in order to get rid of it, literally 4 to 5 to 6 months, you have to take the antibiotics. You usually have to take more than one to totally kill it. And people with bad health habits, like the homeless and this and that, maybe they take a dose of antibiotic, but you know, when that dose is up and they need to go for their next month's supply, they don't have the money to go get it. Okay? So I wrote in the notes, think homeless shelters, right? Yes. Okay. Lung cancer. Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in both men and women. Okay? Lung cancer kills more than breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer combined. Okay? Are the treatments for lung cancer very good? No. There are certain cancers that are amazing, like the blood cancers, that they can just flat get rid of. It's amazing. But you get lung cancer, you have a very poor prognosis. Right? Now, 90% of the people are smokers that get lung cancer, but that also means 10% are not. I've had a couple of patients where they found a nodule in their lung. They cut it out, it was a lung cancer, and they were not smokers. Okay, I've had several patients like that tell me their story. Okay? Most people die within 1 year. About 17% make it to 5 years. Okay? Lung cancer is very aggressive, and it spreads very rapidly from the lungs to the brain, from the lungs to the liver, from the lungs to the kidneys. It's very bad to metastasize. Okay? Most of the time when they find lung cancer, it's pretty far down the line, and that's part of the reason that there is not a good prognosis, okay? But in my opinion, they're no better today than they were 25 years ago treating lung cancer, okay? It's the same with pancreatic cancer. It's just not good, okay? There are some that they can really get rid of. That's amazing, but brain cancer, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, sorry, it's very poor prognosis, and you may make it a few years, okay? The best treatment, okay? If not metastasize, the best treatment is just cut the whole lung out. That's the best treatment. You can live on one lung, by the way, right? If it's already spread, if it's already metastasized, radiation and chemo, okay? Radiation and chemo. Yes. Now, I don't look down on smokers. Addiction starts up here. It's mental, in my opinion, right? And everybody has certain things that we're addicted to, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. I drink too much Diet Dr. Pepper. I have a hand-carved pipe, meerschaum, that I bought in Istanbul. Took me an hour to dicker with the guy. It was kind of fun. And then in the middle of the negotiation, he says, "Do you want some tea?" "Yeah, okay." And he brings out the tea pitcher and a little bitty glass, that tall, about that big around, and pours steaming tea in it, right? So we sit there and we drink tea and then we make a deal, right? It really is a cultural experience. It was cool, right? And so, man, I get that aromatic tobacco, some of it infused with Irish whiskey, some of it, you know, the different flavors. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. I totally understand. I could do that 10 times a day. It's very relaxing, not cigarettes, but the pipe. It's very relaxing, right? Every once in a while I had 2 boys, drive me crazy. I have to go out to the garage, sit down, smoke that pipe, and I totally get that relaxing, make the headache go away. Yes? Sometimes if I have a splitting headache and I feel terrible, I go out to the garage, and sometimes it will help. Not always. Sometimes it will help, and then it'll calm down and go away. So I totally understand that, right? It's about brain chemicals. My father-in-law was alcoholic, right? Richard, he hadn't had a drink in the last, well, I've known him 37 years. He hadn't had a drink 37 years, but anyway, right? But some people, it tastes so good to them, it lights up their brain chemicals. Yes? And so I don't look down on people that are smokers or drink too much. I totally get that, right? So I could be in their shoes easily, right? But it's a very self-destructive behavior. And I still smoke my pipe about once every 3 months. I still do, because it's relaxing, right? Yes? So, but anyway, one of my patients, she was a smoker and she drank way too much, and she was able to quit drinking for a period of time, you know, and I talked to her and I said, "Look," I said, "I'm so proud of you." And I told her that I don't look down on you because it takes one to know one, right? And I was the same way. I could so easily do that. You know, occasionally I do have a gin and tonic, but yeah, no, I can't do that very much, right? The most I've ever drank is 2, yes? I went on a motorcycle trip. We were in southern New Mexico. We had a ball all day long, sweating, and then we stopped and camped for the night, and I got out the little things, a Fireball. I drank 2 of those. Oh my God, because we had sweated and dehydrated the next morning. Oh my God, the hangover I had, it's terrible, so I won't do that again. But anyway, it'd be very easy to do that, right? So, when you encounter people like that, just realize that there, but for the grace of God, go you, right? So, okay. Monday, yes, Monday. I was going to have that's another thing, I was going to have your test made, and the copier's down, okay? So we're not here tomorrow, so I can't have it made tomorrow. So Monday, I'll have the test made up if the young lady's here and they've got the copier fixed, and then we'll take the midterm. Yes? Make sure you know the valves, the blood flow through the heart. You know about RH. You know how to do the blood typing. Make sure, I want you to make a good grade on that, okay? If you make a really good grade in lab, then it's much easier to pass this class, okay? Okay, any questions? No? Okay, see y'all.
I'm just putting over what our stuff is.